Hey, everybody. As we kick off the new year, our guest today is a perfect fit to talk about his journey and what we can learn from it. Alan Stein Jr. spent more than 15 years working as a performance coach with some of the biggest NBA stars in the world, including one-on-one with Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant. Alan saw firsthand the physical and mental approach these athletes applied to their craft, and he now shares those lessons with others. Alan speaks to major corporations all over the world and has written a few books on productivity and performance. His practical strategies apply to not only sports, but to business and parenting as well. So there's something in this conversation for all of us as we sit down with Alan Stein Jr. Hey, a quick message, folks, before we get started. I've been listening to podcasts for years. I've listened to thousands of them, and many times I hear the hosts ask listeners to subscribe to the show or to provide a rating. Now, as a host myself, I know why. The subscription numbers and the ratings help the show to grow, exposing Pay Your Dues to more people and helping to bring in high-quality guests. If you like Pay Your Dues, I ask that you follow the show, perhaps provide a rating, and know that we appreciate your support. Now, let's get to it with our next guest. I think the timing's perfect because, we're coming up on a new year and people start thinking about self-improvement, and we should be thinking about it all year long. How do you feel about New Year's resolutions? Are you big on that, or what's your take?
My overarching answer to most things is everyone just needs to find what the right fit for them is. For me personally, I used to be a big New Year's resolutions person, but I've kind of transitioned away from that. There was another time where I was kind of into that, just pick one word as your theme for the year. For me, if someone is going to go the New Year's resolutions route, my recommendation would be to have singular focus and focus on one habit or behavior to really drive and dive into, as opposed to an overarching smattering of things that they want to improve. I do really respect, admire, and appreciate the motivation that most people feel with the new beginning of a new year. And I understand the new year, new me mentality. And I do want folks to use that as extra gas on the fire. But it's been my firsthand experience and the experience of working with a lot of people that when you have 5 or 6 things that you want to level up in the new year because you're so excited about making it the best year of all time, that you're not doing most of those things most of the time by the end of January.
Yeah.
Whereas you'll have a better result if you simply have singular focus and say, this is the one thing that I want to prioritize for the year, and I'm going to go after this thing with reckless abandon. If you'll have a better rate of return if you do that. For me now, I just kind of look at the year holistically. Right now, the day we're recording this, December 22nd, I believe it is.
Yeah.
If there was something in my life that I thought needed changing, I'm not waiting 8 more days to change it.
Right.
I'm changing it today. So I'm kind of creating New Year's resolutions throughout the year.
Yeah.
I don't really romanticize January 1st, but that's just me. There's nothing wrong with someone that has a different approach.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And a lot of people I've talked to on this podcast, it is about lifestyle, like in challenging yourself and learning about yourself along the way throughout the year, right? And your book definitely covers that. And I want to talk about your latest book, but I think it's, because you're going to miss that mark, right? That people fail in their resolutions, but then are you going to spend the next 11 months waiting to do it again? You need to get sometimes you get punched in the face, and it's about, the resilience to come back. And a lot of your career is working with people in the face of adversity. So I think as it relates to resolutions, that's part of it. You got to go into a mindset that it's a continual thing. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And this is kind of a central theme of Next Play, but I'm a really big believer that how we process and how we respond to disappointment, to dissatisfaction, to discouragement, to falling short of a goal, to when things don't meet our preferences, when things don't go our way, how we respond in those moments ultimately dictate our performance, dictates our productivity, but most importantly, dictates our fulfillment in life.
Mhm.
Because generally speaking, for all of us, life is a series of ups and downs. It's a series of highs and lows. It's a series of I hit my goals, a series of I fell short of my goals. It's a series of that's exactly what I hoped would happen to that's not at all what I wanted to happen. So for me, if we know that life is going to continually throw things our way and about half the time we don't get what we want, how we behave in those instances really dictates who we become and the type of lives we lead. And because I kind of know how we all behave when things go well,
Right.
like that's easy. But how do we respond when things don't go well? And to me, that's really what I want to focus on. As a parent, I've got three children. I've got almost 16-year-old twin boys and an almost 14-year-old daughter. So kind of the thick of the teenage years. And
Mhm.
most times when I talk to parents and I ask them, what do you want for your kids? The most common answer is, I just want my kids to be happy. And I can appreciate that answer. Now I have a slightly different take on it, but I think I understand the general sentiment behind it. But here's the way I look at it. For me, happiness is an emotion, and by definition, emotions are not permanent. Emotions are going to ebb and flow. Even the happiest human beings on earth are not happy 24/7. They
Mhm.
might be happy more often than other people, but happiness is something that just ebbs and flows. So when someone asks me what I want for my children, I'm not so concerned with their happiness. I'm concerned with their resilience and their emotional maturity to be able to respond when things aren't going well. So in other words, I want to have kids that are strong enough to lead great lives even when they're unhappy. So my answer is kind of a flip over what most parents say. I want my kids to be happy. That's great. I want my kids to have great lives even when they're unhappy because I know that's going to take up a majority of the time.
Well, and that you talked about emotion, and you say in your book, you point out that I think most emotions last like 90 seconds, right? So when you think about negative emotions, and we're always hit with those all day, knowing that you're going to process that hopefully in a short amount of time is a big thing. And as adults, we struggle with that, and I'm sure our kids struggle with that. I have teenagers as well, but you talk about that, so it's really dealing with how to deal with negative emotions too. That's a big part of that.
Absolutely. And one of the keys for me is and understanding that. So basically, these are more of our kind of primal visceral emotions. And the research that I read, which was shocking to me, was the average emotion lasts about 90 seconds, which means you go to Starbucks, the barista messes up your order. You're very annoyed and frustrated. Well, you're going to be annoyed or frustrated for about 90 seconds
Mhm.
if, and this is a huge if you're willing to accept and allow that emotion, if you're willing to just sit with it and let it pass through you. See, the mistake most people make is they start throwing extra coal on the fire and they keep restarting that 90-second clock
Mm.
by the story they tell themselves. And then they start saying, well, this barista is an idiot. I can't believe they messed up my order. How hard is it to make a latte? And I can't believe this is happening to me. I've got this big meeting coming up, and this person, and every time they start telling themselves that story, they're basically starting the 90-second clock over. And some people will allow themselves to be emotionally hijacked for 2 hours on something that should have lasted 90 seconds. And I say that with a smile and all the compassion in my heart because for 45 years of my life,
Mhm.
I allowed myself to do the same thing. I allowed myself to get bent out of shape over the most trivial inconveniences until I realized that the only person I was punishing was me.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, if the barista messes up my order and my primal response is to feel annoyed, that's okay. I'm allowed to feel annoyed. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just information on how I'm registering the world around me. And I let myself feel it. I let it run through me. I do not let it dictate my behavior. So just because I'm feeling annoyed, I would never be disrespectful or rude to the barista because I'm going to separate how I feel from how I behave, how I feel from how I treat others. And to me, that's the definition of emotional regulation is not letting our feelings drive the car, not letting our emotions dictate how we show up. But I never suppress feelings. I don't ignore them. I don't resist them. I just say, hey, I'm feeling really irritated right now that my coffee got messed up, but this is a part of life. And I'm going to choose the next play that will allow me to move forward. And 90 seconds later, I'll be fine.
resonate with that. I thought about that when I read your book. I thought of 2 things, me and traffic, and I've been working on that. I've been working on that for a couple of years, just like, right, processing that, and then, the feeling we all have it that you end up in the longest line at the grocery store at the checkout. Like, I feel like I'm always that guy that and I used to really bug me, and I've really tried working on being, recognizing I'm frustrated and being patient in that moment because it ultimately you're just hurting yourself if you let that chew up
Yeah.
inside of you.
Because it never changes your circumstance.
Yeah.
No matter how irritated and frustrated you get, the line at the grocery store isn't changing based on your frustration.
Yeah.
No matter how angry you get, the cars in front of you in traffic don't all of a sudden part ways and allow you to get through. So ultimately, it doesn't do anything to change the outcome. It only changes like your internal chemistry and your mood and how you feel. And life's just too short to allow ourselves to be hijacked by those inconveniences that are going to happen regularly. So for me, what I've learned to do, and please know that everything I share on stage, everything I shared on page in that book, and everything I'm sharing with you right now, I'm not coming from a place of mastery.
Mhm.
Like I have not mastered sitting in traffic or being at the end of a long line when there's an inept cashier. Like I still have room to improve. But what I can say with a huge smile is I'm handling those things way better, more often than in any other previous point in my life. So I'm going in the right direction. And for me, what I do now is if I'm at the end of a long line and I'm feeling frustrated and agitated and anxious and I've got somewhere I need to be, the first thing I do is I just slow down and I take a pause. And I remember that I don't have to react emotionally or react impulsively. I'm allowed to respond thoughtfully. And part of that process for me now is I've tried to gamify this. And as someone that comes from the sporting world and a coaching background, I have a a strong appreciation for repetition. Like
Mhm.
that's how you get good at anything is you put in the reps. So now I realize that in my internal wiring, one of the skill sets that I need to improve the most is patience, is tolerance, is
Mhm.
acceptance. So I've now learned that when these things pop up, it's the universe's way of reminding me that I'm still not free. It's the universe's way of saying, Alan, you still need to practice patience, acceptance, and tolerance. And we're going to give you a good repetition to practice that right now. So I've learned to flip it and have a level of gratefulness that I now have an opportunity to practice the very thing that I'm not very good at, but that I need to do to actually grow. So I can sit at the back of that line, feel myself getting viscerally frustrated and irritated, take a deep breath, smile, laugh, and go, here we go. I'm going to get a chance to get a repetition at the very thing I need to practice. And that levity actually helps me just kind of move on. And to be clear, it's still not my preference to be at the
Sure.
back of a long line. It is still not my preference to be stuck in traffic. But I finally come to the conclusion that all of my preferences don't get met all of the time. And how do I behave when things don't go my way? I believe is a truer definition of who I am as a man than how I behave when things are going great. So I just try to look at these things as a chance to practice the very thing that I need to practice.
The repetition that you're talking about goes back to the first thing we said when we're talking about resolutions and a process throughout the year. This is, what I was referencing as well is like we're constantly working on ourselves and working on these things, right? And I know for me, I mean, it's a daily or weekly battle where I'm faced with challenging my patience, right, and dealing with it.
Yes.
I want to ask you about where it all started for you, because before you were speaking to, thousands of people on stage, before you were working with NBA players, which I definitely want to ask you about, you were a basketball player yourself and you
Yes.
played at Elon University, which I was reading about, and you played a decent amount as a freshman. And then what happened? Because, we learned so much from other people's lives. I think there's some key moments in there that help shape you.
Absolutely. And I'll go ahead and say with a huge smile that almost every single thing I preach and teach today, I did the exact opposite of when I was a player. I mean, one of the biggest things talk about today in my work is having an attitude of extreme ownership and accountability and not blaming, complaining, or making excuses. Well, Greg, if you knew the 18-year-old Alan, he was the king of blaming, complaining, and making
Mhm.
excuses. Anytime something didn't go my way, it was someone else's fault. It was the coach's fault. It was a teammate's fault. It was the referee's fault. And now I can look back with compassion on my younger self and just know that I was so riddled with insecurity and so dependent upon how I performed, on how I felt about myself, that I just didn't have the emotional integrity to behave any other way. So I've forgiven my younger self, but I certainly operate differently moving forward. So right now in my life, I do everything in my power to hold myself fully accountable for all of my decisions and all of my responses. I'm well aware that I don't control circumstances, so I don't control the long line with the inept cashier,
Mhm.
but I absolutely control how I respond to that situation. And that's what I pay attention to. And that's what I try to model for my own children. But I did a really poor job of that, especially when I was an athlete. It's fascinating to me to play the mental hypothetical of how much better of a player I could have been if I had the 50-year-old Allen mindset in the 18-year-old Allen body. But I think many people can look back and say the same thing about their lives. But yeah, I was a pretty good high school player. I say pretty good because I was good enough to play in college, but
Uh-huh.
certainly not good enough to play after that. But what you're referencing was I went to Elon and I got a lot of playing time my freshman year. Now, part of that was because Elon was historically really bad when I got there. My freshman class got there. So they really didn't have much choice but to play a lot of the freshmen because they really wanted to try to level up. But I allowed myself at that time to click on a switch of complacency, to click on a switch that, well, if I'm playing a lot as a freshman, then I'm pretty much set for the next 4 years. Like, this is going to be great. And unfortunately, that's not the way college athletics works. The coach did his job, which was recruit an even better class after mine. So when I was a sophomore, there were some really good freshmen that came in, and all of my teammates that were freshmen at the same time, they worked a lot harder that off season to get better for their sophomore year. So basically my sophomore year, I didn't play very much. And in hindsight, I can tell you why I didn't play much, because I didn't deserve to.
Uh-huh.
I didn't get better, I didn't improve, and I would not have added as much value on the court as the other players. But at the time, I wasn't capable of seeing that. At the time, I took it as a slight. I thought the coach was an idiot. And I took an attitude of blaming, complaining, and deflecting to everyone else. There was a distinct fork in the road when I started to not play very much. And that is put on my hard hat, roll up my sleeves, get back to work and earn more playing time, which is obviously what the 50-year-old Allen
Sure.
recommend. Or I could pout, sulk, whine, blame, complain, and make excuses, which is the route I chose, as a 19 or 20-year-old, and basically never really played any meaningful minutes for the rest of my college career. And I'm okay with that now because it was an unbelievable learning lesson, and it gives me tremendous compassion now when I meet a young person who reminds me of me when I was their age. So when I meet a young person who I think is hard-headed, they're a knucklehead, they're not open to listening or being coached, all they do is blame and complain. I don't judge that kid because I was that kid.
Uh-huh.
Now, I do everything in my power to get them to see it differently, and hopefully it won't take them 30 years to figure it out. But I have nothing but compassion when I find someone that was stuck in something that I was also stuck in. And with that being said, there are current areas of my life right now where I'm still stuck and I haven't been able to break through that threshold. And all I can say is that the future version of Alan, the 60-year-old version of Alan, will hopefully look back at my current state with the same level of compassion and grace. I don't have it all figured out at 50. I know that I'll never have it all figured out, but I am moving in the right direction. And that's what's most important to me.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I mean, we all make mistakes, and you learn from that mistake, right? And you're teaching others as a result of it. I mean, I think if somebody, writes a book or they're on stage in a keynote speak as keynote speaker, and they're trying to come off as they're perfect. I think that's a hard sell, So I appreciate you sharing, those parts of your life that you've had your own challenges because it's real. You found your way into coaching as, strength and conditioning and performance coach. Is there a difference between the two when you say performance coach versus strength and conditioning?
The role just kind of evolved. When I first started in the early 2000s, the title was just strength and conditioning coach because, to be honest, that's really all we were tasked for doing, was making players stronger and make sure they were in good shape. That role started to really evolve over the years and decades that would follow, where that position was responsible for every aspect of performance. I mean, it was nutrition and
Hmm.
hydration and sleep and mobility. And so it just became a more all encompassing role, and thus kind of evolved into a more all encompassing title. But no, you're basically talking about the same types of things, but you weren't just responsible for someone being stronger and in good condition. You were responsible for all of their performance. So the title kind of evolved as I continued to progress through that world.
Yeah, it makes sense because I mean, professional athletes today and college athletes, even high school, they spend, it feels like, so much more time thinking about nutrition, sleep, all these other elements, right? Even mental health, I mean, is a topic which is important, and that certainly has changed over time. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy to think. I mean, even so, I'm turning 50 in a couple weeks of the time of this recording. So I grew up basically as a product of the 80s and the 90s. I mean, I played my high school basketball in the early 90s. And even then, we didn't really have any type of formal strength and conditioning. Now, that
Yeah.
happened to be a passion of mine. My parents bought me an old Universal Joe Weider set
Oh
of
yeah.
weight out in the basement. And I bought the strength shoes, which anyone of my age or older that was into basketball back then would know what those ridiculous things were. But I knew that I wanted to jump higher and I wanted to run faster, that I wanted to try to improve my athletic ability. And conceptually, it just made sense to me. Well, if I make my muscles stronger, that's kind of like putting a bigger engine in a car. I'll probably be able to run faster and jump higher. So I took it upon myself to want to do that. And then, of course, there was the vanity of being a teenage boy. And I wanted to look good at the
Mm,
beach and have some
yeah.
muscles for the girls. So all of the things aligned that I just kind of fell in love with strength and conditioning for myself. And that's what kind of started me on the path. But no, I mean, it's crazy now. Most elite level high schools have a full time performance coach working with their high school athletes today, and not that many years ago when I was playing, like, no one was doing any of that stuff. And, I mean, think about most likely, what Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were not doing back in the 80s compared to what someone like a LeBron James is doing today,
Yeah.
as far as the performance work on their body and on their mind. It's just grown exponentially. And I'm very grateful to have been a part of that wave and been entrenched in part of that transition and the growth of that industry, because I mean, it was something that I really loved doing and found a lot of meaning in.
I like to talk about crossroads in people's careers because that's part of paying your dues. Is you decide to go, stick with basketball and sports because you have a love for it, and then there were some breaks for you along the way. But what was it that took you in that direction to stay in the basketball lane? And you worked at a really prominent high school, and I mean, I'm sure it wasn't easy to, you ended up working with NBA players, which we'll talk about, but what was the grind like for you and kind of trusting that that was the path you wanted to be on career wise?
Well, for me, I mean, basketball has been my number one passion ever since I was 5 years old. So, as we've already talked about, the first portion of my life, act one, if you will, was as a very dedicated basketball player, which had its ups and downs. But then as I was closing out my career at Elon, especially not even playing, I mean, it was clear to me that I wasn't going to be able to play basketball professionally, but I still loved the game and still wanted to make a living in the game. And at that time, there just weren't a whole lot of options on what one could do. But at that same time is when I just mentioned I fell in love with the performance side and the strength and conditioning. So it just kind of dawned on me like, hey, if I could make a living combining my original love of basketball with this new love of strength and conditioning, and someone would pay me to do that, boy, that would be a dream job. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. And that is exactly what I did. I've always been a capitalist at heart, and certainly have been motivated by monetary benefits to some degree, but that was never the number one driving force. My intellect at the time was, if I could wake up every day and do something I love, like that's got to yield a pretty great life. I mean,
Uh-huh.
that was pretty basic math. And if I get to wake up every day and work with basketball players and teach them how to run faster and jump higher, like as long as I can make enough of a living to live a good life, boy, that sounds like a great deal. And that's really all I thought to do. And it did. It worked out pretty well. Thankfully, it turned out to be a little more lucrative than I thought, but still not, the reason for doing it would never be for money. But I had an absolute blast. And I realized I loved the relationships that I was forming with the players and coaches every bit as much as I loved the actual X's and O's of the training component. So it really was uh, just the perfect role for me and the perfect job. And I had an absolute blast doing it and learned so many different lessons, had so many great experiences, met so many amazing people, got to travel the world. I mean, it was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean that part of your life is so interesting because I think you recognize that you had a window into the world which you speak about now and you write about now, but you had this window as a job working with some of the greatest athletes we've ever known, Kobe and Durant and so many of these names. What are some of the lessons you learned from, if you peel back the curtain, right? And somebody stepped into your shoes and they're watching Kobe work out. What would we see in that?
there's there's I could probably put together a list of 12 to 15 traits or behaviors or disciplines that I saw firsthand from those type of players that I believe have the utility that we could apply to any area of our life. But I'll give you the three that stand out immediately. The first is they never got bored with the basics. Those guys understood how important the fundamentals were, and that the fundamentals were the foundation to which everything else was built. So they never tried to skip steps. They worked on mastery of the fundamentals to get really good at their craft. And that applies to any of us in any area of life.
Uh-huh.
The second is they learn to earn their confidence through demonstrated performance and by the work they put in during the unseen hours, but they always remained humble. And when I say humble, I'm saying through the lens of, because most people would not hear the name Kobe Bryant and immediately think humility.
Uh-huh.
But here's why a guy like Kobe is humble, or was humble, is because Kobe would still stay open to being coached. Kobe would still be open to feedback from competent sources. But most importantly, his humility was shown because he knew that no matter how good he got, he could still get better. He wasn't worried about whether he was the best on his team or the best in the league, because that's playing the comparison game. All he cared about was he the best that he was capable of being. And it's that type of humility blended with confidence that makes a really lethal elixir, if you will. And then the third trait is these guys are maniacal about pursuing a goal, but they're very process centered. They understand that the best way to achieve the outcome they want is by focusing on the process that's right in front of them. So that they're very process centered, and they've created processes that will give them the best chance to reach the outcomes that they want. And those three things in particular have really shaped my life and shaped my perspective on really how I approach anything. I mean, any area of my life that I aim for excellence in, whether it's being a father, being a speaker, being a writer, I want to make sure I'm falling in love with the fundamentals and sticking to the basics. I want to make sure I'm earning the right to be confident, but still staying open and staying humble. And I want to figure out whatever I need to do. What is the best process or system that will allow me to be excellent in this area? And I'm constantly interweaving my life in and out of those three different traits.
So Kobe was notorious for his work ethic and his grind and the Mamba mentality. And you write about seeing that firsthand in kind of his practice schedule. Could you share some of that firsthand experience that you had with Kobe?
Yeah, I mean, he really had an insatiable work ethic, but that was just because he was so driven to be the best player that he was capable of. And you know, um, everything comes down to just what's a good fit for each of us. Like Kobe had just an almost unparalleled capacity for physical work. I mean, he could work out 6 to 8 hours a day and still continue to make progress. most of us are not built that way. And the reason I bring that up is when I'm telling stories about the lessons I learned from him, I always want to make sure that the lesson people pull away is not more is better, and
Yeah.
that if if working 10 hours a day as a sales professional is good, then working 15 hours a day is even better. So that the lesson is not that more is better. The lesson should be that better is better, and to find what works for you. Find what you can use as your separator and what you need to do to show up as the best version of yourself. Because the average human being walking the earth is not built or wired like a Kobe Bryant. I mean, he's a once in a generation type athlete, and there's plenty of things that we can learn from him. But I never wanted kids to think, well, I need to be practicing basketball 8 hours a day if my goal is to be really good. Because what will that will lead to more often than not is injury or burnout or stagnation. And we definitely don't want that. So I think for each of us, we should constantly be in this state of what I call always becoming. Always becoming. That's one of the central themes of Next Play.
Mhm.
And it's always becoming a better version of yourself, always becoming a more efficient version of yourself. So, I want to make sure that the 50-year-old version of Alan is a slightly more evolved version than the 49-year-old version of Alan. And that's my goal, is for systematic, progressive, incremental improvement. And we can only do that if we're looking through the lens of I'm always trying to step into a new version of myself.
So this would apply to both athletes and parents, business executives, teachers, whatnot. Um, I think dealing with negative self-talk is a big thing for folks, because I think that holds us back a lot. Whether you're an athlete or in business, whatever it is, we tell ourselves we can't do something, and or we don't try to do something because of that negative self-talk. And as a coach and then as a speaker now, how do you guide people to work their way through that mental roadblock before it ever stops them from doing what they really want to try to accomplish?
Well, at the base level is to remember, and this, I first heard this from Eckhart Tolle, but I would imagine this has some root in either Stoicism or Buddhism, but that is, we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness and the recognition of our thoughts. So it's important for us to realize that we have to separate what it is we think from who it is that we are. And there's a lot of very visceral and primal thoughts that all of us have, and we don't control our thoughts. And with that being said, our thoughts play a massive role in how we feel. Our thoughts play a massive role in our emotions and feelings. So if we don't control our thoughts, then that means we also don't control our emotions and our feelings. But what we do control is our response to those things.
Mhm.
The reason I say that is it's human nature to have some negative self-talk and some negative thoughts, but you don't have to listen to it, and you certainly don't have to behave according to it. It's okay to have unpleasant thoughts, to have thoughts that aren't helpful. Like for me personally, lots of times when something doesn't go my way, my very first thought is like, why is this happening to me? Or this isn't fair. Or
Mhm.
man, this sucks. Like that's my initial thought. And I can't control that that's my impulsive reaction, but what I can control is what I do with those thoughts. And I realize that asking those types of questions is not very helpful framework. So instead, when things don't go my way, I try to take a deep breath and ask myself a different set of questions. I try to respond thoughtfully and say, all right, this didn't happen the way I had hoped, but what can I learn from this? How can I gain from this or benefit from this? What is something I can do to improve my situation now? So when it comes to our self talk, what I recommend people do is you start learning to talk to yourself the same way you would talk to a loved one, the same way you would talk to a child. With some of the work I'm doing on myself now, what I'm trying to learn to do is how would I talk to my 5-year-old self? Most of us would not be very critical or judgmental to a 5-year-old, especially our 5-year-old self. We would probably want to give ourselves a big hug and give ourselves some compassion and empathy. And yet we talk to ourselves in present day
Yes.
in a very critical and destructive way. So that's what I encourage is, when you start going down that rabbit hole or that spiral of negative self-talk and saying, I'm not good enough, or I knew this would happen, try to reframe that and say, all right, imagine you're talking to a loved one, or you're talking to a child, or better yet, imagine you're talking to your 5-year-old self. And usually that will give you a higher level of compassion and empathy. And none of this is about letting yourself off the hook. Like, I believe in holding myself to incredibly high standards, but I can hold myself to a high standard with compassion, empathy, and kindness. I can hold myself to a high standard with self love. I know you and I are just getting acquainted, but if you and I were really good friends and you called me after you had a really hard day, the last thing I would do would be very critical of you and pile
Mhm.
it on. As your friend, my natural inclination would be able to say, "Hey, Greg, I'm sorry you had a tough day today. I know that doesn't feel good, but just know, man, I believe in you. And I know you're strong enough to learn from this. And I can't wait to see how you respond because you're good enough." And that would be so why would I not talk to myself that way?
Right.
Why would I not talk to myself with that same type of empowering language? And that's something that I'm really trying to get better at with myself and really encouraging other people to do as well.
Yeah, I resonate with that so much. I coach cross country, and I notice like when the boys are racing, the girls from the girls team, they're out there cheering them on, and when the girls are racing, the boys are cheering them on, right? And so I try to tell our runners like, when you're in mile 3 and it sucks and it's hard, what are you saying to yourself? Are you talk to yourself the same way you would be cheering on, Eli
Yes.
or one of the other kids that you're normally cheering on. We don't do that enough, but I think talking about it certainly helps because um, you talk about mindset in your book, and I think that's so much, about the physical part of the NBA players and the people you've worked with is one thing, but the mindset is another. And the mindset is something we can all, constantly work on and strengthen. I think you say mindset is a choice in your book, and I just wonder what do you mean by that?
Well, real quick before I answer that,
Yeah.
one of the things, and I love that example of your runners cheering each other
Hmm.
on. One of the rules that I've tried to put in place for my life that I try to live by and model is not saying anything out loud that doesn't serve me. As we've just established, I can't help what I think. If I'm on mile 3 of a really difficult cross country run, I can't help that I'm thinking this is hard or this sucks or I'm tired. But I can control whether or not I actually speak that into existence and whether I say it out loud. And I don't know the research off the top of my head, but there was a gentleman named Trevor Moad who wrote a book called It Takes What It Takes. And in that book, he referenced some study about how much more powerful it is when we speak things to existence, like how much more likely that is to come true. So, at the very least, just don't say stuff out loud that doesn't serve you.
Hmm.
If it's hot outside, you know it's hot. You're saying to yourself it's hot, but you don't have to verbalize it and say it to anybody else. So I'm very careful about what it is that I speak into the world. And that goes back to I can't help what I'm thinking, but I can help whether or not I listen to it, and I can certainly help whether or not I speak into existence. So for me, and I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I have drastically cut down the number of occurrences where I say something out loud that doesn't serve me.
Yeah,
And
I would say in just back to running, Alan, I think, it's pretty popular to have a mantra in running and it works. I can tell you it works. Like if you're saying, I'm getting stronger or, you got this or whatever it is, it's proven that that works. And that's exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, and that's all that'll weave in nicely with mindset. Like for
Hmm.
me, when we talk about mindset, because I'm a believer in the fundamentals and the basics, I try to get rid of anything that makes things unnecessarily complex. So my definition of a winner's mindset, or if you ask me, what is my definition of mental toughness? It's someone who does the best they can with what they have wherever they are. Full stop. I don't need to make it any more complex than
Hmm.
that. You show me someone that regardless of circumstance does the best they can with whatever tools they have wherever they are. That is someone that is really hard to beat. That is someone that is going to be relentless, someone that is going to be resilient, because now you're not at the mercy of circumstances or events. You're not at the mercy of what other people say or do. You're just going to give the best effort you're capable of and have the best effort attitude you're capable of regardless of what's going on. And the reason I love that and try to live that out in my own life is it puts me back in the seat of power. See, if I give power away to circumstance or to my opponent or to the weather or to the course that you're running in cross country, I've now given my power away. Instead, I just say, hey, I don't have control over any of those things. And I accept that. but I do control how I'm going to respond to those things. So I get to mile 3 and I'm on a hill of a cross country course. I have the ability to respond by saying, this sucks and this is really hard. Or, man, what a cool opportunity for me to get stronger. Or what a great way for me to separate myself from all the other runners because they're going to have more trouble on this hill than I am. Both of them, the hill hasn't changed at all.
Right.
Both of them is just how I choose to interpret the exact same situation. And obviously, one of those will lead to a more empowering performance than the other. So for me, someone that does the best they can with what they have wherever they are is unbeatable.
Yeah, I can tell you mindset is the difference in running. I mean, I see it, in kids. Like sometimes a kid probably has more talent, but they don't have the right mindset and they fall apart. I see it all the time, and it happens on all ages. And I think that ties. I mean, back to your book in the name Next Play. Where did that come from? And that really speaks to you get punched in the mouth, whatever challenge that is, and you're moving on. So if you could explain that, I mean, I think that's definitely part of what we're talking about here.
Sure. Well, the entire premise of Next Play is that we don't control circumstances, but we control our response. And instead of responding to things in an emotional, impulsive way, I want to respond intentionally and thoughtfully. And this can be to little minor annoyances in life, like the Starbucks barista messes up your coffee, to something much bigger, like you lose a loved one. But in any circumstance, we get to choose, or we have the ability to choose what our next play is going to be. So at the heart of Next Play, it's to stop worrying about what just happened and focus on what's happening right now. Stop worrying about what you wished happened and focus on the reality of what actually happened. Stop worrying about what was and focus on what is. Now, in full transparency, the actual concept of Next Play, I learned from Coach K, the former men's basketball coach at Duke. And I learned it in the year 2000 when I read his first book, Leading with the Heart. And I remember reading it, and logically I understood it, conceptually I understood it, mentally I understood it, but truthfully at that time I didn't have the emotional maturity to actually implement it in my life. I allowed myself at that time to constantly be emotionally hijacked by just about anything. I would give my power away. In the example we just used, like I would give my power away to the hill at mile 3 on the cross country run, instead of me assuming the power and saying, hey, I don't control that there's a hill here, but I absolutely control how I respond to the hill. And that's in essence what Next Play is all about. It's about taking all of the surroundings and circumstances and events in life, processing them and responding thoughtfully. And the term I use all the time is try to make your next play your best play. So don't worry about what you just did. What's the next thing you can do to move yourself forward? And what's the self-talk or the mindset or the approach that you can use that will actually inch you a little bit forward? And that's really what Next Play is all about. We don't control what life's going to throw at us, but we always control what we do next. And there is always a next play.
There's wasted energy in if you don't do that, right? If you get caught up with the thing
Yeah.
that went wrong, like let's say basketball, you missed the shot, you're worried about you're worrying about the next shot. There's a lot of wasted energy in there if you just get stuck with that.
Yeah. I mean, to the point of, I say with a huge smile and all the self compassion in my heart, I mean, I have wasted years, if not decades, over that type of stuff. But true to Next Play fashion, I can't go back and change any of that. I can't go back and do any of that differently. So my only recourse is to accept that I did the best I could at that time with the tools I had and forgive my previous self for that wasted time and just do the very best I can not to waste any time moving forward. It reminds me of that adage that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Next best time is right now. And I can't do anything about the 20 years ago, but I can absolutely plant a new tree right now. So that's what I'm trying to focus on. But in essence, yes, it is so much wasted energy because the thing is, even when we pout, we sulk, we get upset, we have bad body language because we didn't get the outcome we wanted, it still doesn't change the outcome. Like, it'd be a completely different story if I told you that when you get stuck in traffic and you're finding yourself irritated, that if you get really mad, all of the cars will get out of your way and traffic will improve. If that's the case, then by all means, get as mad as you can because it will change the outcome. But that's not the case. those cars will still be there. And all you've done is punish yourself by allowing yourself to feel stressed and angry in that moment. All you've done is ruin your mood for a few minutes, and the outcome still hasn't changed. So you might as well go ahead and take the route of self-improvement and evolution as opposed to regression.
One of the emotions I don't think we've talked about as much, but ties into this is fear, right? Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of how you might look to others, and that's definitely part of what you talk about. And how do you coach someone, whether it's an executive or an athlete, about facing their fears and working their way through that?
One of the ways to resolve most fears is to dive into being present. I mean, most fear comes from our anticipation of the future and a future that we think is going to happen. And we start worrying about something that's never even occurred yet because technically the future doesn't really exist because you can never be in the future. All you can be is in the present moment. I like to joke that when the future gets here, well, it's now the present moment. Like the future is always an arm's length away, and yet, as human beings, we understandably, as a protective mechanism, tend to fill in the gap between what we believe is going to happen in the future and our present set of circumstances. And if we don't like the presumed future that we're hypothesizing, that's usually what creates some level of fear. So the antidote to that is certainly to be prepared and proactive for whatever might come, but to really dive into the present moment, and all of this stuff that I'm sharing is very easy to say and very hard to actually
Uh-huh.
do. I know I deliver most of this with a very matter of fact tone, but this stuff is really hard. And I still have a handful of fears, some of them rational, some of them completely irrational, that I still struggle with. And my antidote for that is to try to just dial into the present moment and to not spend time worrying about something that may never even occur. Because as they say in Buddhism, there's no reason to suffer twice. So, if you're worried about something that's going to happen tomorrow, just wait until it's in the present moment and deal with it. There's no sense in ruining today, worrying about something tomorrow that may not even happen. And if it does actually happen, well, now you've suffered twice because you're worried about it in advance and you have to worry about it when it's actually happening. So I'm trying to get better at that. But if I had to come up with a list of the handful of things in this world right now that I still struggle with, that's pretty close to the top of the list, but
Yeah,
I'm getting better.
yeah,
And that's why I can say with a huge amount of smile, like I deal with my own fears and insecurities today better than at any previous time in my life. And if you have me on your podcast again 10 years from now, I sure hope that at that time I can say I'm dealing with it even better then than I am in the present.
yeah. And that's why we have to keep talking about it. I mean, that's I think the beauty of podcasts and books and things like that. It's not a one and done. We're constantly working on that, right? And I think that's part of it. And none of us are perfect, so it's the constant battle. But if you stay with it consistently, I think good things come with that, and that's wasted energy, that fear, like we talked about before. There's a couple different ways to waste energy, and fear is just you're wasting energy on something that you don't control. So, Alan, practically speaking, I know you've talked about bookends of the day, and I think that's a good lesson for people really to think about, practical ways to take all this information and implement it into their lives to take those steps to see the progress. What do you mean by bookends of your day that you've talked about?
Uh, I'm a big believer in really trying to be intentional and purposeful and proactive in designing the first 60 minutes and the last 60 minutes of every day. You know, and depending on your age and your season of life, like that's going to change drastically for a lot of people. I mean, if you're watching or listening to this and you're a single mom and you have an infant child at
Yeah,
home, like that's going to be a completely different set of parameters than someone that has a different life situation. So none of this do I encourage folks to play the comparison game of, well, what does Greg do for his morning and evening routine? And let me see if just figure out what works for you. But the general premise is you should prime every day by doing some things in the morning that engage you mentally, physically, and emotionally, and things that make you feel good and energize you and get you ready to show up as your best self for the day. And then at the end of the day, you should have some type of practice to reflect and debrief and be grateful and get some peaceful sleep so that you're ready to start the next day again with the same energy and vibrance. And I just believe we have a little more control over protecting the bookends of our day than we do during the chaos that happens in the middle, because just so many things are going on in life. But most people in most seasons of life can have at least a little bit of control over what you do for 15 minutes in the morning or 15 minutes at night. I'm not encouraging everyone designs the most perfect morning routine that takes 3 hours every
Right.
single and has been, derived in a lab or no, just figure out a couple things you can do to start your day that make you feel good.
Yeah.
And what are a couple things you can do to end each day that also make you feel good? And start aligning your day that way, and you'll see a lot of things increase immediately. You'll
Yeah.
see your performance, your productivity, your optimism, your confidence, your energy. All of those things will go up when we invest in our self care and we do things that energize us. And that's really what I encourage folks to do.
Yeah, being intentional, that's such a key point there, I mean, wherever you are in your life and the different things happening, if you're intentional about, what you're working on and that self-improvement, I think that's definitely where it starts. Um, for the back to the NBA players, because we lightly touched on that, is there something that most of us don't recognize about NBA players or professional athletes, like something from their world that might surprise us? I mean, we think they have these perfect lives, and I've had Spencer Hawes on here from the NBA, and he was like, "Hey, man, I struggled as a rookie. Like I was lonely on the road and things like that." And I'm just wondering, it's not always so perfect, and they're just people too. So I don't know if that's a broad question or not, but I'm just wondering from your experience if there's things that maybe we don't always know whether it's good or bad.
No, I mean, I think you just touched on it so brilliantly. They are human beings. Now, they're human beings that have a specific talent or skill set that causes most of the world to admire them. But what's always interesting about especially professional athletes is the rest of us, the normal human beings, only get to see a very small snapshot of what it is that their lives are like, and that snapshot is usually pretty favorable. It's them, playing really well on the court or field, and them driving around in nice cars and doing really cool things. But that's only one side of it. We're very rarely privy to everything else. But they're not immune to the human condition any more than you and I are. Like they still have feelings and emotions and relationships and insecurities and fears, just like everybody else. They just tend to be really, really excellent at one thing that a lot of people admire and revere for them. But yeah, their ability to be able to deal with their stuff and to continually evolve and grow, yeah, is vital. So I love that someone like Spencer is willing to acknowledge that, hey, I'm a human and I'm a man first.
Yeah.
I'm basically a basketball player second. So don't get it twisted. I've got my share of problems, and lots of times we're all lulled into thinking that a certain amount of money or a certain amount of fame inoculates you to all of these other parts of the human condition. And that's not the case. Like you can have $1 billion and still be deeply insecure. You can be an unbelievable basketball player playing in front of millions of people and you still have visceral fears. Like those things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, great points. On the corporate side, I'm wondering, you've been, speaking to major corporations for years now, and you interact with a lot of people. Are there certain questions or requests you get from, those organizing these keynote addresses, or are there certain topics that people are coming to you with? I'm wondering if there's a common theme of what kind of the business community is seeking for guidance, if you will.
Well, funny enough, it's almost the exact same thing they were seeking in the athletic world. And that is just how do we improve performance?
Mhm.
This world is how do we improve productivity? And there's a few different lenses at which they look. Some groups bring me in to help each member of their team, as we say, raise their game. I put that in air quotes because that was the name of my first book. But how do we make each member of our team a higher producer and higher performer? Some groups bring me in and say, hey, can you teach our leaders to be more impactful and more influential so they can lead with excellence more consistently? Some groups bring me in and say, hey, like we want the whole team to be playing nicely and collaborating and have more cohesion and improve our culture and communication So can you come in and help us all play together nicely in the sandbox? But it's all the red thread that ties all of those together is performance. How do we perform at a higher level? And performance is exactly what I did when I was in the basketball world. It was just it had a different outlet because I was trying to get players to perform better on the court. But really, the central themes and concepts are the same, regardless of what someone's trying to improve.
Yeah, they apply to business, they apply to sports, and I think, going back to our first point, whether you have a resolution or not, I think if you're chipping away and, my old coach used to say sharpening the axe, right? If you're sharpening the axe, you're taking time to invest in yourself and your team about getting better. That's where the success is going to come throughout the year. Your book
Yes.
is Next Play. You got a couple other books, Raise Your Game, Sustain Your Game. And where do people track you? I know Instagram is a pretty good place to see your stuff.
Yeah. So my main hub is just my website, which is just alansteinjr.com. If anybody is interested in my speaking programs and the things I offer, that's usually the epicenter of everything. I am at Alan Stein Jr. on Instagram and LinkedIn and the other social platforms. I take a lot of pride in being very accessible and responsive. So if someone has enjoyed our conversation and you have some questions you want to ask or share something or learn more, just shoot me a DM on Instagram or fill out the contact form on my website. I'm really good about getting back to folks. And then, yeah, if someone's interested in any of my books, but especially the new book, Next Play, you can just get that on Amazon or Audible, wherever you get your books or audio books. Lots of groups right now are actually investing in a copy for their whole team or organization. And if folks reach out to me through the website, I can give you a really generous bulk discount on that for your team. And then some groups are bringing me in to give a very Next Play specific talk, both in person and virtually, because they realize the power of everything that you and I have talked about
Yeah.
today, the power of being able to process all of the external that we don't control and thoughtfully and intentionally respond internally is really the key to everything we're looking for in life. And that's the thing I cannot stress enough. If your goal is just to improve performance and productivity, Next Play is a framework that will help you do that. But if you also want to live a more enjoyable and fulfilling life, Next Play is also the framework for doing that. So you get a lot more bang for your buck. And for me, I'm at a point in my life where, yeah, how I show up and my performance and production is very important to me. But so is enjoying the journey, and
Yeah.
so is enjoying life. And Next Play has really been the framework that's helped me do that so far.
Well, it's helped me too. I mean, I really enjoyed the book, Alan. I have to tell you, and it applies. I've applied it to my running, my business, my podcast. These are all things that I want to improve on, right? Because that brings me fulfillment, which is a word you brought up earlier. I think you said you've got a mantra that the next 50 will be the best 50. I
Yes,
love
that is.
that. I'm a couple years older than you, but I really love that because I think we're just, hopefully just getting started. And by doing these things, the best years are ahead of us.
I absolutely believe that. I always believe that the best stuff in my life is ahead of me. And I say that with context. I mean, certain things like having children,
Sure.
I'm set on not having any more children, and my three children are amazing and I love them. But I also believe that my next evolution in my relationship with them is going to be even better than anything previously. Like right now, I'm loving the teenage years. And I know you don't hear very many parents say that, saying loving and teenager in the
Yeah.
same sentence, but I'm loving the conversations that we're able to have. Now, does part of me miss like when they were younger and some of the things that we were doing then? Of course, but that's just nostalgia. I mean, there's parts of my own teenage life that I miss. I miss going to Pizza Hut and the Blockbuster and renting a movie, and that was my Friday night. There's some nostalgia there, but I really and truly believe that my best relationships are still in front of me. My
Mhm.
best speaking opportunities are still in front of me. As proud as I am of Next Play, my next book, my best book, is still inside of me at this moment. I haven't put pen to paper yet. So I do believe my best experiences, my best relationships, my best learning lessons, all of that stuff is still in front of me. And it doesn't mean that any of the previous experiences are any less valuable or important. But to me, that type of optimism that my next play is always going to be my best play and that my next 50 is going to be my best 50 is something that drives me. And I'm sure you and your listeners can hear and feel my passion. And that is not manufactured. I absolutely believe that with every ounce of my being.
Yeah, and I believe you. I mean, it's real, and it's in the book. And look, I think this is coming out at a perfect time. We're putting it out in January. Motivate people not just for the first month, but let's listen to this podcast a couple times throughout the year. Read the book a couple of times throughout the year, and follow you on Instagram and whatnot because you're putting good content out there, Alan. So appreciate
Thank
you
you.
being here and sharing the positive message.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you. Keep up your great work.
Thanks, Alan.